Hello folks and welcome to the complete beginner's guide for Khazan. First things first, this guide is heavily timestamped, so if you're looking for anything specific, then do feel free to skip ahead. Otherwise, I've structured this in a more or less sensible order, covering everything from the basics to some of the more in-depth mechanics, unlockable a little bit later on in the game. We don't cover many specifics for any of the weapons here. I do have full breakdowns for all weapons on the channel, and I am working hard on many more guides, but regardless, this guide is absolutely rammed with information, so let's get started. So I think it's only right to explain some core mechanics and concepts that might be new, not often seen, or even just new for some people. Beginning with the 5 core stats, we have Vitality, Endurance, Strength, Willpower, and Proficiency. Put simply, Vitality mostly affects your max health and attribute resistance, but also has some lesser effects on your damage and max weight. Endurance mostly affects your max stamina and stamina recovery rate, but also has some lesser effects on max health and damage. Strength is the core damage stat for greatswords, meaning greatsword users will focus on this stat for damage. It also mostly affects max weight and decreases stamina damage received. Willpower is the core damage stat for dual wielding, meaning dual wield users will focus on this stat for damage. It mostly decreases stamina damage received when guarding, but also has some lesser effects on max health and stamina recovery. Finally, proficiency is the core damage stat for the spear, meaning spear users will focus on this stat for damage. It mostly affects stamina damage dealt and decreases the stamina cost of dodging, but also has some lesser effects on max health. In addition to these stats, we have agility. This is dictated by your overall weight percentage, shown right here. Of course, max weight can be increased, and the combined weight of all equipped gear is what decides this. The differences between A or B are not explicitly explained. I don't know the full ins and outs, but I can confirm that having A over B will provide an additional 30% stamina recovery rate and reduces the stamina cost of dodging by an additional 10%. To increase your max health, you can only do this by first finding certain items scattered around certain maps. I do intend to cover all of these in a future guide, but you should stumble into the majority of them on your own journey. Simply picking one of these up will immediately increase the max amount of your healing charges. Moving on to the combat mechanics, a brutal attack is quite simply the attack that plays out when you activate the corresponding button for whenever this icon is displayed on enemies. It can be procced by either exhausting an enemy's stamina bar or by sneaking up behind them by walking very slowly. Next, we have Brink Dodge and Brink Guard. Both of these are simply when you either dodge or guard at the exact moment the hit connects. Doing so will cause the dodge or guard to become a brink, which can have many beneficial effects depending on how you spec your skill trees. Additionally, a brink dodge or guard will not consume any stamina. As an advanced tip, you do well to get comfortable with these. The greatsword leans a little more into guarding, the spear a little bit more into dodging, and the dual wield is a nice medium, but all weapons are capable of building around dodging or blocking. Oftentimes, a mix of both is optimal. They offer huge benefits, and having some level of skill with them will be required for the tougher challenges. Next, we have burst attacks, which can be countered attacked. First, burst attacks are displayed with this icon. They cannot be blocked, but they can often be dodged. A counter attack can be activated by holding block and pressing B or circle at the exact right moment. Doing so will have huge temporary effects on most enemies and will usually reward a large damage window. As another advanced tip, I also recommend trying to get comfortable with counter attack, as it really can make the tougher fights more forgivable, and getting to grips with this will only take some practice. Next, all enemies have what's called stagger resistance, meaning they have an invisible meter that is depleted the more we attack. This can cause them to be interrupted during attacks and allow us larger windows of damage. 1 or 2 heavy attacks may not be enough, but always take this into consideration, as it does apply to all enemies. Once an enemy is staggered, you can maintain this stagger by keeping up with consecutive attacks. Typically, a combination of swift attacks, potent blows, and spirit skills would be preferable. Maintaining these staggered states will be required for the tougher fights. Next, we have what is called Frenzy. Frenzy is a state that enemies may either start or go into during battle. During this state, they will be more aggressive. Additionally, their stance can no longer be broken, meaning we cannot apply a brutal attack. Instead, however, depleting the stamina bar will take the enemy out of its frenzied state, where it once again can be staggered. Additionally, if an enemy is entering frenzy during a battle, breaking their stance during this transition phase will cause them to not frenzy at all. Finally, I would like to briefly touch on the Phantom. This combat mechanic will not be unlocked until progressing roughly 1/3 through the game. Once unlocking this, it will allow for additional survivability, damage, and or stamina potential, but it is not something we're covering in this guide. Moving on to a large part of this guide, we have the Crevice. To those unfamiliar, this will act as a central hub of operations. Over time, this will become populated with NPCs who have various different utilities and services for us to use. We'll be going through the most important for the beginning to mid-section of the game. Now, the Crevice essentially acts as a meeting ground between realms. Before long, you'll have unlocked an additional light section. In a nutshell, most of your gear management will be done on the light side, and progressing through missions will be done on the dark side. As a few general rules, you will want to periodically return to the Crevice and speak with all of the NPCs, especially after main story beats, such as the final boss of an area. Doing so will oftentimes reveal side quests, which are essential to progression, and we will cover them a little bit later on. Now, before we cover the NPCs, it's important to note that there are two core currencies within Khazan. We have coins and Lacrima. Coins are almost exclusively used to buy gear and or equipment. They are also used to augment gear. Lacrima is used to purchase additional levels and reroll gear stats. There are other minor currencies used for a range of different things, but we'll cover them as and when they come up. Beginning with the first of the Crevice's facilities, we have the Standing Stone for Charnak Mountain Range. This essentially acts as your mission map. Here you can select main missions or side missions to either play or replay. More of these will become unlockable as time continues, each Standing Stone representing an entirely new region of the map. Whilst within these maps, you are able to see what special currencies are still left to be found and where, represented by this icon and number right here. The pot represents Danjin's jars and the ore represents Soulstones. Both of these will be covered more in depth very shortly. Next, we have our own personal stash. Not much to say here other than it's useful for keeping a hold of gear for all manner of reasons. Next, we have this barrel. This will be where you can retrieve any DLC items such as the armor sets from the deluxe edition and any future editions. Next, we have the Battered blade Nexus. First, apart from of course being used for leveling up, this will also allow us to access Khazan's memories. This is essentially where you can recap the events and lore of all missions, as well as check the character relationship map for additional pieces of lore. More importantly, here we can retrieve vengeance points from checking on previously completed regions. With these, we can press the corresponding button at the bottom of the screen to open the upgrade menu and grant ourselves some permanent buffs. Do not forget to check on this as progressing through the game. After progressing through the main story a little bit, you will eventually unlock the phantom abilities. These are essentially passive buffs we can choose between and level up. It's a simple mechanic. Find the Phantom's activation item somewhere throughout the game, activate the Phantom, and then level them up by simply defeating enemies. Their max level is roughly 20, and with each level increase, the passive buff does slightly upgrade. They can also be awakened for additional buffs, however, that will be coming much later on in the game. Next, we have Oksana, the first utility NPC available. After a brief while, she will relocate to this section downstairs, which is more or less her permanent location. When we first begin the game, Oksana will only have basic services available, which is to simply extract Lacrima from pieces of gear. It's a useful function if needing extra for an additional level or upgrading, but I would recommend holding off on this until unlocking further mechanics. Once progressing through the main story a fair bit, you will eventually unlock this area named the Silent Temple. Once completing this area and returning to Oksana, she will now be able to change the attributes of gear as well as augment gear itself. Changing the attributes of gear is simple. Any of the random attributes can be selected and re-rolled at random for a small cost of Lacrima. Each additional re-roll will cost increasing amounts, usually up to the point where it becomes very costly. Augmenting gear is a little bit different. Here, we can instead take a piece of gear we would like to slightly upgrade and infuse it with a different piece of gear of a higher level. Doing so will destroy the higher level gear. However, it's a solid way of getting some additional time with a strong piece of gear that you like. I don't know how effective this is in terms of keeping preferred gear relevant. That would need further testing. Next, we have Duimuk, who will be the first NPC you encounter on your journeys. Once he has arrived at the Crevice, he will essentially act as a shop, allowing you to sell pieces of gear for coins and also having a refreshing inventory of goods for sale. I recommend checking back here often to stock up on useful supplies. The second NPC you'll encounter on your travels is Daphrona. She offers a few different services. First is unleashing Soulstones. Soulstones are the collectibles found throughout the different maps. They can be tracked from the Standing Stone screens. Unleashing Soulstones can either upgrade your overall health recovery or how much Lacrima you receive upon defeating enemies. After a certain amount of any upgrade, you will be able to increase your max spirit by 1 point. I'm unsure as to when this maxes out, but do not forget to come back here often. Next, we have the training grounds, which doesn't need much explaining, except that you can unlock enemies as you progress through the game to then come back here and practice against. Finally, we have upgrading the Spirit of Advocacy. This is the spirit that can be summoned prior to boss fights, using an increasing number of Lacrima of circulation found by defeating the red spirits scattered around maps. You can upgrade the max health, stamina, and damage of your own summon. Up next, we have Qazumaka the Blacksmith. Once unlocking his services, you will be able to craft individual pieces of gear, as well as look at entire sets that you've previously discovered. These sets are found in a number of ways, typically by defeating tough enemies or finding them in fixed locations. Upon bringing them to the blacksmith, you will unlock the entire set. Set bonuses are very strong, but not something we're covering in this guide. In addition to this, you can also dismantle equipment here, which is very useful for requiring the materials needed to craft certain gear. The final NPC we will meet within the Crevice for now is Danjin. Once unlocking Danjin, you will have the ability to find his jars scattered throughout each playable map. More specifically, jars will be located in every map. Breaking them has a chance to reveal one of Danjin's jars. Some are much easier to find than others. I will be covering all jar locations in a future guide video. These are also marked on the corresponding standing stones. Danjin also offers a few different services. First, upon returning set amounts of jars, he will have helmets available for purchase. Some of them are very useful, but all of them look just as good as the last. Additionally, Danjin will also have a growing number of lanterns and rare materials available for purchase. The materials are all mostly boss related. He seems to only have a limited amount and they all cost Lacrima, but it's definitely worth checking back here often. In regards to the lanterns, some of them are much more useful than others and they are all quite self-explanatory, so do enjoy. Now, as a quick bit of bonus advice, there is a very good armor set found within the light side of the Crevice. When first arriving here, begin following the path on screen. Once here, dash into this wall to reveal the other side, and within this chest, you'll find the Executioner's armor set. Now, for the final part of this guide, I wanted to cover Daphrona's Codex and the consumable items within the game. Daphrona's Codex can be found within the main menu and unlocked as you unlock Daphrona's services. This Codex is more than just a bestiary, as it does have some entries within here that reward unique items, such as the red-eyed boulder bat has a challenge where it needs to be defeated without using any recovery consumables. Doing so will reward the poison-resistant parchment, which is required in order to craft poison-resistant elixirs. I recommend checking this often and reading through the available challenges to see what rewards are available and what you need to consider when facing certain enemies. Now, as for consumables, these will mostly be found through either looting defeated enemies or crafted by the blacksmith. I recommend taking these into consideration when dealing with particularly difficult regions or bosses. Now, the basics are a cleanse potion will completely rid you of the effects and build up of whatever is affecting you. A resistance elixir will not rid the effects but will cause the build up of the effects to grow slower. Enhancers are used to imbue your own weapon with temporary effects. Concentrated essence can be thrown and cause a small area of effect upon exploding. Spirit fuel acts in a similar way but does not explode. In addition to these, we have more specific items like Soul Tear Dust, which simply regains the very small amount of 300 HP and grants 400 Lacrima. There are better versions of this, such as a Soul Tear Stone Shard, which will recover 500 health and grant 2000 Lacrima instead. We also have Vitality Stones, which temporarily boost stamina recovery, great for boss fights. Additionally, we have Willpower Orbs, which can be used to recover health at the cost of spirit. Finally, for the items, we have some of the rarest, being Tearstone Summons, which retrieve the lost Lacrima from the most recent death. Useful if you died in an awful area or position and would rather not risk your Lacrima. We also have Primeval Regression Orbs, which, despite what the description states, they do in fact reset all stats, meaning only one is needed to respec your stats. For the very final and also very brief section of this guide, we're going to cover some very quick hints and tips. Dodging towards an edge will prevent you from falling, useful for navigating, but bear this in mind when trying to escape an enemy. You can press the sprint button to both fast climb and slide down ladders. Some chests are booby trapped. Pay attention when looting and dodge quickly out of the way if you see sparks appear. And finally, the game does feature an in-game encyclopedia within the main menu, useful to research what certain terms mean and what specific mechanics do. That's it for this guide, folks. Of course, we have covered the most important beats right up to roughly mid-game with this guide, mostly helping those unfamiliar, but hopefully clearing up some other things for those of you who are more experienced. I am working on a wealth of different guides currently, so do keep an eye out on the channel. I'm also looking into a Khazan code giveaway, which I'll hopefully have more information on very, very soon. Otherwise, thanks for watching, folks, and until next time, peace.